US President Donald Trump has doubled down on his hardline trade stand, declaring that no country, especially China, would be spared from his sweeping tariff.
The U.S. economy is currently grappling with intense volatility, so much so that some observers are calling this a critical turning point. On one hand, leading American retailers have begun scrapping numerous orders from Chinese suppliers. On the other, an overwhelming backlog of freight at China's shipping terminals is straining international trade dynamics. But what's really behind all this? As tensions between the U.S. and China heat up again, many are asking, are mounting tariffs and rising logistics costs dismantling supply chains beyond repair? Let's dig into what's really going on. Recent reports from major American outlets point to a growing trend. Chinese importers are seeing wave after wave of order cancellations. In particular, dominant online marketplaces and top-tier retail brands in the U.S. are witnessing a dramatic decline in the inflow of Chinese merchandise. Economists fear this surge in pullbacks could destabilize the global supply web. Containers are stagnating at Chinese ports, some never even being loaded, others pulled from the system entirely. The magnitude of these reversals is so severe, even the freight sector is beginning to feel the chill of economic slowdown. This leads us to an essential question. Why the sudden spike in U.S. cancellations? Is it purely tariff-related or is there more at play? According to information quietly leaked from official channels, recently introduced supplemental tariffs, which are expected to stay in place for the foreseeable future, have made importing goods staggeringly expensive. The Biden administration's pronouncements about sharply increasing duties on goods tied to defense and strategic industries are raising red flags among companies relying on Chinese manufacturing. These elevated duties are expected to hit everything from electronic hardware to pharmaceutical components and consumer electronics. Coupled with America's current inflationary wave, the cost of these imports eats directly into retailers' profit margins. Put simply, big corporations are reluctant to raise prices or risk selling at a loss. So how are Chinese manufacturers responding? Social media chatter paints a picture of resistance. Factory owners across China are reportedly rejecting requests for discounts. While U.S. buyers are pushing for lower prices on existing orders or seeking compensation, Chinese suppliers are holding firm. Some reports suggest they're saying exports are already down, we need to preserve our margins. Chinese producers have long voiced concern over rising material and labor costs. Now they're signaling that this crisis may hit both sides hard. The American media warns that the buildup at Chinese ports could trigger a massive logjam in the logistics backbone of global commerce. Some of the largest U.S. retailers are said to be scaling down their China sourcing strategies and turning to alternatives. There's official speculation that businesses are trying to game the system, dodging higher tariffs by redirecting supply chains to Southeast Asia and other emerging hubs. Translation: American companies are concluding that importing from China has simply gotten too expensive, and they're chasing cheaper production zones. This trend of rerouting supply chains may mark a shift in the structure of global trade. Some interpret it as the beginning of a new economic paradigm. Others think it's just a passing phase. But is it? Some in the trade community argue this disruption could persist, especially if the U.S. continues down the road of aggressive tariff and tax policies. The resurgence of protectionist strategies, reminiscent of the Trump era, aims to boost domestic industry, but such a shift demands that major retailers and e-commerce giants start opting for American-made goods, even at a premium. That pivot isn't simple. China remains the epicenter of global manufacturing, dominating output in countless sectors. From gadgets to garments, its factories offer a cost advantage that's hard to beat. As tariffs start to chip away at those cost advantages, the whole market feels the imbalance. Businesses are scouting for cheaper labor elsewhere, but massive shipping companies are also being dragged into the storm. Canceled orders and unshipped goods are creating chaos in the freight industry. Some reports indicate that ports are now flooded with empty containers. Freight prices are plummeting, and port operators are taking financial hits. Meanwhile, consumers may soon face price shocks, especially in segments like consumer tech, apparel, and home goods. Moving supply lines to pricier countries almost guarantees higher price tags. When prices rise, demand falls, pressuring the supply chain further. It's a downward spiral. And yes, this spiral is hurting e-commerce behemoths like Amazon. Chinese sellers, who once made up a large portion of the platform, offered budget-friendly products that drove massive volumes. Amazon reaped the benefits in commissions, but now many of those sellers are raising prices or exiting the market altogether. Screenshots on social media show small sellers telling American buyers, "We're updating prices due to new tax rules." Others are simply pulling out of the U.S. that could shrink Amazon's variety and disrupt its low price advantage. Less competition, after all, usually means higher costs for everyone. Where do Chinese manufacturers stand in this growing impasse? Reports suggest that Chinese factories are turning down all requests for pricing adjustments, while American buyers try to renegotiate terms, demanding discounts or added perks on prearranged deals. Suppliers in China are holding their ground. The rationale? Exports have already dropped, and many of these manufacturers insist they can't afford deeper financial hits. Their focus has shifted towards stabilizing operations and protecting profit margins. For months, they've been raising alarms about increasing input costs, from raw materials to wages, and now those strains are coming to a head. U.S. news sources are warning that the backlog of containers could paralyze key logistical arteries in global commerce. If the stalling trend persists, this logjam might spiral into a full-scale disruption, impacting not only retail chains but industries far beyond. Top American retailers have already begun scaling back reliance on Chinese production. Some firms are actively working to reroute supply chains through Southeast Asia or alternate low-cost markets. The idea is clear: sidestep China's rising tariffs by relocating sourcing to more affordable and less politically fraught destinations. It's a strategic shift that points to broader recalibration. Retailers are recognizing that sticking with China may no longer be economically viable, and are scrambling to diversify their global manufacturing footprint. This growing shift in supply strategies has sparked debate. Is this the start of a fundamental realignment in global trade, or just another cyclical reaction to geopolitical pressure? Some experts predict it will be short-lived. Others believe the shift is a sign of enduring policy changes in Washington, particularly if the newly announced tariff structure becomes permanent. Much of this reflects a renewed embrace of protectionist policy. Like prior administrations, the current White House aims to boost domestic manufacturing and make American producers more competitive. But to accomplish that, e-commerce giants and retailers alike must begin favoring domestically made goods, even if those goods cost significantly more. That's a difficult proposition. China continues to dominate as the global engine of manufacturing. Its production infrastructure spans across vast sectors and delivers sheer volume with unmatched efficiency. That scale, combined with lower production costs, has made China the go-to source for businesses around the world. Still, the tariff hikes are beginning to erode China's competitive edge. As the price advantage fades, market dynamics shift. In response, many businesses are hunting for lower-cost labor markets. But it's not just the brands that are under pressure. Shipping providers are getting hammered too. With demand for outbound cargo plummeting, shipping firms are reporting steep losses. Empty containers are stacking up in yards, driving down shipping rates, while port authorities are grappling with underused infrastructure and sinking revenue. As this storm brews in the background, it's the end consumer who may feel the impact first. Prices for consumer staples, electronics, clothes, furniture, are expected to fluctuate wildly. When brands pivot from China to costlier locations, they almost always pass those expenses onto consumers. That means higher price tags, reduced purchasing power, and a feedback loop of falling demand and further stress on the supply chain. The tariff ripple effect has now reached tech giants. Amazon is among the hardest hit. Chinese merchants have historically made up a substantial chunk of Amazon's third-party ecosystem. Their competitively priced inventory drove significant transaction volume and allowed Amazon to rake in millions through its commission structure. But the new wave of tariffs is changing all that. Increasingly, sellers based in China are either scaling back their presence or leaving the United States market entirely. On social media, screenshots are surfacing from small-scale vendors alerting American customers to price changes. We're revising prices due to the new tax policy. Others are going even further, shutting down their operations stateside. This retreat poses a serious risk to Amazon's product diversity and pricing edge. With fewer low-cost sellers, competition diminishes, and the cost burden shifts to consumers. That means fewer choices and steeper prices at checkout. Meanwhile, many Chinese suppliers are looking for ways to blunt the financial blow. Industry chatter points to a rise in questionable tactics. Some companies are allegedly misreporting shipment values to reduce duties. These attempts at circumventing customs protocols, while illegal, are seen by some suppliers as the only way to remain afloat. Naturally, such methods come with major risks. Penalties for fraud are severe, ranging from hefty fines to total exclusion from United States markets. Nonetheless, desperation may be driving these gambles. In turn, American customs authorities are ramping up enforcement. Sources suggest stricter inspections and advanced monitoring systems are being deployed to catch offenders. The result? increased trade friction, with both sides digging in deeper. So what's the U.S. administration actually saying? In recent briefings, the White House has stressed the importance of rebuilding the country's industrial base. For years, American businesses thrived on the cost advantages of outsourcing to China. But now, the federal message is clear. It's time to rethink and rewire strategic supply networks, with a focus on national resilience and self-reliance. The press secretary has made it clear this isn't a quick-fix policy. Instead, it's envisioned as a multi-year transformation, one that encourages a shift away from foreign dependency and toward local production. But such an overhaul doesn't happen overnight. Repatriating supply chains requires massive capital, long-term planning, and significant upgrades to infrastructure. There's also the economic reality that U.S.-based production faces a steep uphill battle against global wage disparities. This restructuring could disrupt a wide spectrum of sectors: tech, pharma, apparel, autos, industries that have spent decades embedding Chinese factories into their sourcing strategies. Experts caution that a shift of this magnitude could destabilize parts of the global trade network. If tensions continue to escalate, the combination of higher tariffs and forced domestic transitions could lead to volatility in pricing, investment flows, and supply security across industries. And China isn't standing still. In response to American repositioning, Beijing is also turning inward, boosting domestic consumption and expanding trade with non-Western partners to reduce its exposure to U.S. market shifts. All of this signals a more entrenched confrontation between the world's two largest economies. What once looked like a cycle of tit-for-tat tariffs has now matured into a structural contest, one where the battleground is global supply itself. Now that Washington is reportedly eyeing tariffs on critical imports like semiconductors and pharmaceutical ingredients, the specter of a wider trade war is becoming more tangible. American companies are stuck between a rock and a hard place. On one hand, they're grappling with rising freight rates and elevated import duties. On the other, domestic inflation continues to erode consumer purchasing power, and sentiment remains fragile in the post-COVID recovery period. Raise prices, and they risk alienating customers. Absorb the added costs, and they risk bleeding out profit. Either way, it's a no-win situation. And honestly, many firms are treating this moment with extreme caution. That caution may be driving a sharp pullback in orders. According to industry whispers, U.S. buyers are putting major deals on pause, waiting to see the real fallout from the incoming tax changes before committing to future contracts. This hesitation hasn't gone unnoticed in China. Photos on social media show massive stockpiles of idle containers at major ports. While some of them are reportedly empty, many are said to be loaded with goods from abruptly canceled orders, ready to ship but now with nowhere to go. If this trend continues, it could severely undercut China's export revenues. That poses a major problem for a country whose economic engine is built on outbound trade. A sustained slowdown could jeopardize Beijing's growth targets. But it's not just a China-US issue. Disruptions of this scale ripple far beyond their borders. Europe, Southeast Asia, and even sub-Saharan Africa all are tied into this global ecosystem of manufacturing and distribution. The system is only as strong as its weakest link, and right now that link appears to be fraying. The shockwaves from U.S.-China trade friction are no longer confined to the worlds of online retail or big-box stores. Entire industries are beginning to feel the strain. Automakers, construction firms, and technology giants are all facing new uncertainties. In particular, semiconductor manufacturers are reportedly hitting pause on negotiations, waiting to see if the U.S. will slap fresh tariffs on microchips and other advanced electronics. If those tariffs take effect, consumer tech prices could spike. Everything from smartphones and tablets to smart home devices and PC hardware may see steep price increases. That could chill demand and stall purchase cycles as customers hold off on upgrades and replacements. Some experts warn that this behavioral shift could slow innovation across the tech world. The sector depends heavily on rapid product turnover and customer adoption. If consumers pull back, revenue shrinks, and investment in research and development could take a hit. This is where the strategic dynamics come into play. China holds a powerful card in global manufacturing dominance. The U.S., by contrast, wields control over one of the most lucrative end-user markets in the world. Both sides are testing how far they can push without triggering irreversible damage. It's become a careful waiting game. Trade analysts say widespread cancellations and clogged supply lines may soon be business as usual if this conflict escalates further. As more industries are pulled into the tariff vortex, everything from industrial hardware to pharmaceuticals, uncertainty becomes the new status quo. And in global trade, uncertainty is often the most costly currency of all. So can U.S. companies really pivot away from China in a snap? Realistically, no, not without significant challenges. Sources suggest that retail titans like Walmart and Amazon have begun scaling operations in countries like India, Indonesia, and Vietnam. But rerouting a global supply chain isn't as simple as flipping a switch. These new regions need time to develop manufacturing infrastructure, skilled labor, and logistics networks robust enough to handle the load. And while diversification is underway, China remains unmatched in terms of production scale and efficiency. More importantly, its domestic market is a massive draw. Many multinationals rely on Chinese consumers for future growth. Pulling out entirely could mean sacrificing huge profits. That's why most companies aren't exiting, they're hedging. Instead of a full decoupling, we're seeing a layered strategy reduce exposure without severing ties. In a recent April statement, the U.S. government admitted that trade issues won't be resolved quickly, but officials reiterated plans to expand domestic manufacturing capacity and reshape American supply chains for long-term resilience. Meanwhile, Chinese officials are striking a similar note, stating their intention to focus on internal market growth and expand trade partnerships outside the West. In effect, both sides are digging in for a long contest. This isn't just another trade dispute. It's a global realignment playing out in factories, ports, and policy decisions. Neither country wants to be the first to back down, and both are preparing to outlast the other. The real question isn't whether they'll resolve their differences soon. It's who can endure the most pain while the stalemate drags on. With major United States retailers pulling back from China and tariff threats looming larger, we're left asking, is this a passing disruption or the beginning of a prolonged economic standoff? China's refusal to budge on pricing, despite surging container backlogs, suggests it's digging in for the long haul. At the same time, American companies are exploring workarounds, not to abandon China, but to cushion themselves against growing unpredictability. A negotiated truce isn't off the table, but the road to one is narrowing. Mutual suspicion, strategic rivalry, and election year politics could all delay diplomatic resets. If this standoff hardens, we may be heading toward a more fractured global economy, one where regionalization replaces global interdependence and supply chains are measured less by cost efficiency and more by risk exposure. What we're seeing now, disrupted deliveries, rising consumer prices, and falling retailer margins, could be just the tip of the iceberg. If left unchecked, this slow-burning conflict could dampen global recovery efforts, especially in developing economies that depend on stable trade flows. Wall Street, Washington, and Beijing are all watching the same indicators, and none are optimistic. As corporate giants like Amazon and Walmart adjust their playbooks and Chinese exporters try to hold their ground, the world is left waiting. Will this resolve in boardrooms and back channels, or explode into something more destabilizing? Either way, the era of hyper-globalized trade, where speed and savings reigned supreme, appears to be winding down. We're entering a new phase, one marked by uncertainty, protectionism, and recalibration.